At 0412 UTC on December 1, 2025, something unprecedented happened. Not an asteroid impact, not a solar flare, not a nuclear incident. Something that had never occurred in the entire history of human civilization. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs activated formal planetary defense protocols in response to an interstellar object. Within seconds, the coded alert rippled through secure channels. Embassy duty officers in capital cities worldwide received encrypted messages on systems designed for nuclear emergencies. Defense ministries scrambled senior staff, NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, CNSA, JAXA, every major space agency suddenly had their leadership on emergency conference calls. And in living rooms, bedrooms, and morning commutes across the planet, phones buzzed with breaking news notifications that made people stop mid-stride, mid-conversation, mid-breath. Breaking. UN confirms activation of planetary defense protocols for interstellar object 3I Atlas. The phrasing was careful, almost bureaucratic, but the implication hit like a shockwave. Planetary defense protocols existed for one reason: to protect Earth from extinction-level threats from space. Asteroids, comets, objects large enough and fast enough that an impact would cause regional devastation or worse. The protocols had been developed, refined, exercised in simulations. But never, not once in the 2 decades since their formal adoption, had they been activated for a real object. Until 3I Atlas. For most people, the name meant nothing. A designation in the astronomical catalog. Maybe they'd seen headlines about an interstellar comet passing through the solar system. Interesting for space enthusiasts, irrelevant to daily life. But some people knew more. They'd been following the story. They'd read about the anomalies, the massive size, the radiation-processed crust, the explosive outburst at perihelion 40 times more powerful than expected, the absence of a dust tail, the trajectory changes that didn't quite fit natural outgassing models. And now those anomalies had apparently crossed some threshold, some line that triggered protocols designed for planetary survival. What did the UN know that the public didn't? The first official statement came at 0447 UTC, 35 minutes after the initial alert. The UN Secretary-General, looking exhausted despite careful makeup and lighting, appeared on screens worldwide. The speech was short, measured, designed to convey seriousness without panic. Citizens of Earth. Early this morning, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, in coordination with international space agencies and scientific advisory bodies, activated formal planetary defense monitoring protocols in response to trajectory refinements of the interstellar object designated 3I Atlas. I want to be absolutely clear. This is not an imminent impact scenario. There is no current trajectory that intersects with Earth. The activation of protocols is a precautionary measure reflecting our commitment to transparency and preparedness in matters of planetary security. All necessary resources, observational, analytical, and if needed, defensive, are being coordinated through established international frameworks. Further updates will be provided as our understanding develops. I ask for calm, for trust in scientific processes, and for global cooperation as we navigate this unprecedented situation together. Calm, trust, cooperation, noble sentiments. but the statement raised more questions than it answered. If there's no imminent threat, why activate protocols at all? What are trajectory refinements? What does unprecedented situation really mean? Within minutes of the Secretary General's address, national governments began issuing their own statements. Most echoed the UN's language almost verbatim, clear evidence of coordination, of a unified messaging strategy developed in those frantic 35 minutes between alert and announcement. But some countries added details, either deliberately or through bureaucratic miscommunication. The Russian Federation's statement mentioned anomalous acceleration patterns inconsistent with standard cometary models. The European Space Agency's press release referenced unexpected changes in outgassing behavior requiring enhanced monitoring. China's official Xinhua news agency reported that multiple observation platforms have detected trajectory deviations that warrant precautionary protocols. None of these statements said anything explicitly alarming, but together they painted a picture. 3I Atlas was not behaving as predicted. Its trajectory was changing in ways that natural processes couldn't fully explain. And someone, somewhere in the chain of command that stretches from telescopes to the UN Security Council, had decided this was serious enough to trigger humanity's emergency procedures for cosmic threats. The public reaction was immediate and divided. On social media, hashtags exploded. 3I Atlas, Planetary Defense, UN Alert. Within an hour, the terms were trending globally, with millions of posts per minute. The reactions fell into predictable categories. Skeptics dismissed it as overreaction, bureaucratic theater, governments using a routine astronomical event to justify increased surveillance and emergency powers. It's just a comet, they posted. We've been observing it for months. If it was dangerous, they would have said something earlier. Enthusiasts saw vindication. For weeks, they'd been tracking 3I Atlas through amateur telescopes and online forums, noting the anomalies, speculating about artificial origins. Now the UN was taking it seriously. We told you it was weird, they wrote. Something's not right about this object. Maybe now they'll admit what they really know. Conspiracy theorists went into overdrive. Within hours, elaborate narratives spread. 3I Atlas was a spacecraft, an alien probe, a weapon, an ark. The UN knew all along and was covering it up. The activation of defense protocols was actually preparation for first contact, or for war, or for evacuation of elites, while the rest of humanity faced extinction. Photographs appeared, supposedly leaked from classified briefings, showing trajectory plots with impact zones marked in red. All fake, all quickly debunked, but spreading faster than fact-checkers could counter. And then there were the scared. People with families, with children, who heard planetary defense and interstellar object and immediately thought worst-case scenarios. Schools received anxious calls from parents asking if they should keep kids home. Emergency services fielded thousands of calls about evacuation plans. Grocery stores in some regions saw panic buying water, canned food, batteries, despite official assurances that no impact was predicted. By 08 UTC, 4 hours after the initial alert, a clearer picture was emerging from the chaos. Not from official sources, those remained frustratingly vague, but from scientists breaking ranks to explain what was happening. Dr. Michelle Bannister, a planetary scientist at the University of Canterbury, who'd been studying 3I Atlas since its discovery, posted a long Twitter thread explaining the situation in plain language. Okay, let's talk about what's actually happening with 3I Atlas and why the UN activated protocols. First, no, it's not going to hit Earth. The current trajectory has it passing 1.8 AU from us on Deck 19. That's about 270 million kilometers. For comparison, Mars at its closest is about 55 million kilometers away. We're not in danger of impact. So why the protocols? Because 3I Atlas has shown several instances of non-gravitational acceleration. Its trajectory is changing in ways that can't be fully explained by solar radiation pressure and outgassing alone. This is actually common with comets, but the magnitude and pattern here are unusual. After the massive outburst at perihelion on Oct 29, we expected the trajectory changes to stabilize as outgassing decreased. Instead, we're seeing continued small accelerations, almost like course corrections. The object seems to be altering its path in ways that suggest either A, internal venting from reservoirs we can't see, or B, something we don't understand about its structure or composition. Planetary defense protocols exist partly for impact threats, but also for unknown scenarios, objects behaving in ways that don't fit our models. When an object 15-20 kilometers across, with enough mass to cause a global catastrophe if it hit, starts doing things we can't predict with confidence, protocols say, activate monitoring, coordinate international response, prepare for scenarios. The UN activation is precautionary. It means every telescope that can observe 3I Atlas will be tracking it continuously. It means trajectory calculations are being updated hourly. It means if, big if, the object were to somehow pose a threat, we're ready to respond. It's actually the system working as designed. Her thread went viral, shared hundreds of thousands of times, providing context that official statements had avoided. But it didn't fully calm fears, because buried in her explanation was an admission. We don't understand why it's doing this. And when a 15-kilometer object from another star system is behaving unpredictably, we don't understand is not a reassuring phrase. By midday in Geneva, the Coordination Center had become a nexus of global scientific and political power, unlike anything seen since the COVID-19 pandemic emergency meetings. But this time, the threat wasn't a virus that had already spread worldwide. It was 269 million kilometers away, moving at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, and depending on who you asked, either completely harmless or potentially the most significant event in human history. The facility itself was a modern complex designed for exactly this purpose, built with funding from the Space Generation Advisory Council and operationalized in 2023. It featured real-time data feeds from every major observatory on Earth and several in space. Wall-sized displays showed 3I Atlas's trajectory updated every few minutes, with probability cones extending forward in time, showing where the object might be in days, weeks, months ahead. The teams assembled there represented an unprecedented level of international cooperation. American astrophysicists working alongside Russian space engineers, Chinese trajectory specialists coordinating with European impact modelers, Japanese communications experts managing data flow between observation platforms, all theoretical rivals or competitors, now united by mathematics and physics that cared nothing for politics. Dr. Elena Fedorova, The Russian astronomer who first calculated 3I Atlas's interstellar origin was among those called to Geneva. In a brief press availability, she addressed questions with characteristic directness. Why are we here? Because we need to understand what this object is doing. Since perihelion, we have observed at least 3 distinct events of non-gravitational acceleration. Each time, the object's velocity changes by small amounts, tens of meters per second, but in directions that don't match predictions from standard cometary physics. Could this be natural? Yes, absolutely. Comets are complex. Internal structure, pockets of volatiles, thermal gradients. Many factors could produce these effects. But the pattern concerns us. The accelerations seem almost timed, occurring at intervals that aren't random. We need more data to determine if that's real or if we're seeing patterns in noise. A reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. Could it be artificial? Could this be a spacecraft? Fedorova paused, choosing words carefully. I am a scientist. I follow data. The data shows behavior that is difficult to fully explain with natural comet models. Does that mean it's artificial? No. Does that mean we should consider all possibilities, including scenarios that seem unlikely? Yes. That's why we're here. Not a yes. Not a no. An acknowledgement that the question itself was now legitimate enough to be discussed in official forums, not just relegated to fringe speculation. Meanwhile, military assets were quietly repositioning. Not for combat. You can't shoot down a 15-kilometer object with any weapon humanity possesses, but for observation. Satellites designed for missile defense, capable of detecting objects in space with extraordinary precision, were retasked to track 3I Atlas continuously. Ground-based radar installations, normally focused on Earth orbit, angled upward toward the interstellar visitor. Data from these military systems, rarely shared with civilian scientists, began flowing into the Geneva Coordination Center. What that data showed remained classified, but leaks were inevitable. An anonymous source, claiming to be from the U.S. Space Force, posted to a secure astronomy forum. The radar returns are wrong. Object is too uniform. Natural cometary nuclei show irregular shapes, density variations. This thing's radar cross-section is almost symmetrical, like it's engineered. Another leak, supposedly from an ESA internal memo. Spectroscopic analysis detects emission lines inconsistent with known cometary volatiles, suggest follow-up, with higher spectral resolution to identify molecular species. Neither leak could be verified. Both might have been fabrications, but they fed the growing sense that whatever was happening behind closed doors in Geneva and other coordination centers was more complex than public statements indicated. By evening European time, a pattern had emerged in the information flow. Official statements remained vague and reassuring. But scientists, either unable to stay silent or deliberately leaking to prepare the public, were providing increasingly specific details. 3I Atlas had executed at least 3 trajectory adjustments since perihelion, each altering its path by small but measurable amounts. The object's outgassing, while diminished from the peak on October 29th, continued at levels higher than models predicted for a comet now receding from the Sun. High-resolution spectroscopy detected molecular species that were unusual, not impossible for a comet, but requiring specific formation conditions, unlikely in interstellar space. The object's rotation, measured through light curve analysis, showed periodic variations suggesting either an irregular shape or surface features reflecting light differently, neither fully consistent with expectations for an ancient interstellar traveler. None of this proved anything extraordinary. Each anomaly had potential natural explanations. But the cumulative effect was deeply unsettling. 3I Atlas was an outlier in every measurable parameter, and outliers in space can be dangerous. The UN's activation of planetary defense protocols meant several concrete actions were now underway. Enhanced observation. Every telescope capable of observing 3I Atlas was now coordinated through a central scheduling system. Instead of individual astronomers requesting observing time for their own projects, the object was under continuous surveillance. Radio telescopes listened for any hint of emissions. Infrared observatories measured heat distribution across the nucleus. Optical telescopes tracked position with precision, sufficient to detect trajectory changes within hours. Trajectory modeling. Supercomputers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, ESA's Space Situational Awareness Center, and similar facilities worldwide were running constant simulations. Each new position measurement refined the trajectory calculations. Probability maps showed where 3I Atlas would be at any given time, with uncertainty cones narrowing as data accumulated. Crucially, these models now included what-if scenarios. What if the non-gravitational accelerations continued? What if they increased? What if the object changed direction more dramatically? Impact assessment. Although current trajectories showed no Earth impact, the protocols required continuous impact hazard assessment. Computer models calculated what would happen if, hypothetically, an object of 3I Atlas's estimated size and velocity hit Earth. The results were sobering. A 15-kilometer impactor at interstellar velocity would release energy equivalent to millions of nuclear weapons. It would create a crater hundreds of kilometers across. The immediate destruction would span continents. Dust and debris ejected into the atmosphere would trigger climate effects lasting years, potentially causing mass extinctions. Not a planet killer, Earth would survive, but potentially a civilization killer. Deflection planning. This was the most speculative component. If somehow 3I Atlas were on an impact trajectory, could anything be done? The object was massive, distant, and moving fast. Conventional proposals for asteroid deflection, kinetic impactors, gravity tractors, even nuclear detonations, would be ineffective against something this large. But the planning proceeded anyway, exploring theoretical options, calculating energy requirements, identifying which spacecraft could potentially be repurposed for emergency missions, not because anyone thought deflection was feasible, but because protocols required considering all options. Public communication strategy. A team of communication specialists, psychologists, and government representatives worked on messaging. How do you keep people informed without causing panic? How do you acknowledge uncertainty without appearing incompetent? How do you prepare populations for potential scenarios without making those scenarios seem inevitable? It was an impossible balance, and the early statements reflected that impossibility, saying too little to satisfy curiosity, but perhaps saying too much by admitting protocols were necessary at all. As December 1st wore on, the news cycle began to stabilize. The initial shock of the UN announcement faded into a strange new normal. 3I Atlas was now a constant presence in public consciousness. News outlets ran continuous coverage, with experts analyzing every new observation, every trajectory update. Financial markets, after an initial dip, recovered as it became clear there was no imminent catastrophe. Governments continued issuing reassurances, but beneath the surface calm, anxiety simmered. Because the fundamental question remained unanswered. Why? Why did the UN activate protocols for an object that, according to official statements, posed no threat? Why the military involvement? Why the closed-door emergency sessions? The most disturbing possibility, discussed in whispers, but not yet in mainstream coverage, was that the activation wasn't about impact risk at all. It was about something else. Something that trajectory calculations and impact models couldn't address. Something that required protocols not for deflection, but for what? First contact, contamination, discovery that humanity's understanding of what's possible in the universe was fundamentally incomplete. Late that night, Dr. Avi Loeb, who had been vocal about the need for transparency regarding 3I Atlas, published an op-ed that captured the moment's existential weight. Today, humanity acknowledged, officially and formally, that we are monitoring an object we do not fully understand. That acknowledgement, however cautiously worded, represents a turning point. For the first time, our institutions, the UN, space agencies, governments, have said publicly, something from beyond our solar system is behaving in ways that warrant our highest level of attention and concern. Whether 3I Atlas is a comet with unusual properties or something more, the activation of planetary defense protocols means we are taking seriously the possibility that our models, our theories, our understanding might be insufficient. That intellectual humility, that willingness to admit uncertainty, is perhaps the most important development here. But humility must be paired with transparency. The public deserves access to all data, all observations, all analyses. If there are unusual findings, they should be shared, not classified. If there are legitimate concerns, they should be voiced, not sanitized through careful PR. We are all passengers on this planet, all equally affected by whatever 3I Atlas represents. We all deserve to know what our best science can tell us and what it cannot. December 19th is 18 days away. Whatever we learn in those 18 days may reshape our understanding of our place in the cosmos. Let us face it with open eyes and shared information. Anything less would be a betrayal of the principles that brought us to this moment: curiosity, reason, and the stubborn belief that understanding the universe is both possible and worthwhile. The essay went viral, shared millions of times. Crystal. Global coordination.